So as you know, you've signed up, we're going to be having a look at chores and brain development, specifically looking at why household chores are essential to child's development. And we're going to be using menti.com. Now, for those of you who are new to Menti, don't worry, it's an interactive presentation software and it's very simple to use. You can access Menti in 3 ways. So there is a link that is in the chat that you will see. It says Menti next to it, and you just click on that link. You should be able to go there. And if once you've landed there, you can kind of like the page just to show me that you're there. That just shows that everyone's arriving. You can also use your camera on your phone to access the QR code, or you can go to www.menti.com and enter the code 41425701. So that's 41425701. So I can see lots of people are accessing it, which is wonderful. If you do get stuck and you can't access it, don't panic. The access details will be at the top of each of the interactive slides. So it will just prompt you to go to menti.com. So that's www.menti.com and use the code 41425701. Now, you do need a lot of working memory for that. So if you prefer, you can just use the link in the chat for that. And I think Anne or Jill will be popping the link regularly back into the chat for us, just for those newcomers who might want to access too. So moving on, we're just going to have a look at the housekeeping. So it's going to be a very interactive session today, and we're going to be doing some activities and reflection. And I do have a handout for you. Again, that is in the chat. There's a link to a Google PDF. So you should just be able to click on that, and then you should be able to download it to read it. And that's got lots of links to all sorts of great resources that you can access, information about executive functions, and also information about my organisation, Connections in Mind, and some definitions and various other interesting bits of information. So do take a look at the handout. It should mean that you don't have to scribble down lots of notes, that you can actually be present and enjoy the presentation this evening. So the aims of this talk this evening is going to be about household chores and how they've been proven to help boost essential skills for learning and personal development, which are executive function skills, and why chores are so important and how to get your child on board with helping out around the house, because it's all very well known that they are helpful, but how do we get young people to get involved? So we'll be focusing on that this evening. But I would like to start off with the Menti and just looking at neurodivergent children who use support, and I'd like you to choose 3 adjectives to describe them, and this is going to create a nice word cloud for us of the wonderful traits of the young people that we care for. Fabulous. So we've got creative, funny, loving, unpredictable, disorganized, fascinating, unique, enthusiastic, scatterbrain, thoughtful, independent, emotional. So many wonderful words, and also some challenging ones too, and that's okay, because we're all human beings and none of us are perfect, and it's really important to remember that. But thank you so much for sharing all of those insights with me. That's very much appreciated. So on to a bit about me. So some of you have been to some talks with me before. My name's Victoria Bagnall, and I am one of the co-founders of an organisation called Connections in Mind. I do have a diagnosis of dyslexia, but despite my neurodivergent brain, I did manage to get to Cambridge University to read geography, and then went to work in the food industry for a while before becoming a teacher. I'm also a mother of 3 gorgeous girls, one who's 3, one who's 7, and one who's 11. As I said, a co-founder of Connections in Mind, alongside Dr. Bettina Honan and Imogen Moore-Shelley, and also one of the founders of an organisation called The Code, which offers executive function aware tutoring as well. Now, at Connections in Mind, we talk about our light bulb moments, and that's the moment when people find out about executive functioning and all of their challenges that they or the people that they care for face come into focus, and they have a bit of an aha moment. We call that our light bulb moment. So I've just got to close the door because there's here. And this light bulb moment happened to me after years of repeated crisis, because growing up, I really struggled with my executive functions, and I'll explain what executive functions are in a bit. But I was led to believe by my well-meaning parents and teachers and various other people who were trying to help me to be more organised they made me feel that I was not good enough as a human being because of the challenges that I faced, because they didn't understand what I'm going to be talking to you about today. And this led to many years as a young adult of repeated mental health crisis. And I really felt like this lady here in the circle, going round in circles, tying myself up in knots and just not being able to find a way out. And I had my light bulb moment when I wasn't in one of these crises, but I was helping a young lady who was. She got the highest ever score on the thinking skills assessment for Oxford, but she had really struggled with all the mechanics of learning. So she struggled with writing essays, with revising, with organising her books, with keeping good notes, with knowing what notes to take when she was reading. And so all these mechanics of the learning she really struggled with, but she was very verbally able and also performed very well on this thinking skills assessment. So I was working with her and alongside a psychiatrist because she was really struggling with her mental health. And this psychiatrist recommended that I read this book. And I read this book and I had my light bulb moment. And everything that she was struggling came into focus, but also everything that I had struggled with also came into focus. And I jumped on the first plane over to Boston, which is where Peg Dawson, who's one of the authors, was holding a training, took her out for lunch after the training and said, please come to England. We desperately need you and what you know. And she did. She agreed to come. And in 2015, we trained the first cohort of executive function coaches here in the UK. And it was at that training that I met Imogen Moore-Shelley and Dr. Bettina Honan, and we got together afterwards and had a coffee and said, we share the same passion. We want to change the world. We want to change the way that people perceive executive function challenges and the discrimination that neurodivergent people face on a daily basis. And so, yeah, just this small ambition that we have. And we do that by doing two things. We support people to overcome their challenges, but we also train professionals and parents to support people to overcome their challenges. So for us, it's all about providing support. And we really firmly believe that every single person is only one caring adult away from success. And that's the premise by which we work on. So this evening, I'm going to be talking to you about chores. So it's something that's come up a lot in the literature around executive functioning. And I'll ground that all in a moment for you. But I just want you to just think for a while about how children's kind of activities and roles within the home have changed over the years. And I think we can all kind of realize from the history that we've done that, you know, for many years, in fact, for most of history, children were very involved in the work at home and in chores, and it was all part of their natural development, whether it be sweeping, collecting fruit, you know, doing the washing up, and so on and so forth. But the current generation of children are not being exposed to these responsibilities. And that comes from a couple of different places. It comes from obviously not wanting to exploit children and child labour and being concerned about that, but also the risks involved as well in a kind of health and safety culture where we're trying to keep children safe at all costs. It's very interesting to see how things have changed over the years. And a recent piece of research showed that 76% of UK parents said their children have little to no cleaning responsibility at all. So that's 3/4 of the population are not giving their children the experience, the valuable learning experience of completing chores within the home. So before we get on to how we can tackle that, I want to teach you a little bit about executive functions. So I'd love to hear about your knowledge of executive functions. So back on menti.com, if you will, and if you can rate your knowledge of executive functions for me, please. I'm a geographer, so I love a graph. And this one's showing us that some people have never heard of them before. The majority of the people have kind of heard of them a little bit before, and a few people consider themselves to be experts. So I'm going to pitch my talk this evening at that level. So thank you so much for sharing that. And just thinking about what executive functions are then. So executive functions are the cognitive processes, which means the brain processes, which reside in the prefrontal cortex of the brain. So that's the bit of our brain behind our foreheads. And they're so called executive functions because they're responsible for the effective and timely execution of tasks, getting things done, and the regulation of emotions and behavior. So it's all about getting things done, executing tasks, and that's why it's called executive functions. It's not because when we train young people, we're training them to be executives of, CEOs or anything like that, although you do need strong executive functions to be a successful executive. It's about these brain functions, about getting tasks done. And people always ask me, because I do like to talk about executive functions, and they always question me. So if they are so important, why is it that we don't all know about them? And that's because neuroscience is the newest science that there is out there. And that's because we haven't had the technology to be able to look inside a living brain and see what's going on inside our brains before the advent of fMRI scanners. And now we can see which areas of the brain light up when we're doing certain tasks. And so now we've discovered that executive functions are cognitive processes and not character flaws. Okay, so it's really important to remember that a lot of the things that we might be conditioned by society to think of as character flaws are actually a difference in the brain architecture and the brain development that we have. And it's really important also to remember that every single person on this planet can benefit from working on their executive function skills. And everybody has a unique fingerprint. So this isn't just for children who are neurodivergent, but all children can benefit from this. And I'll talk more about why that is in a moment. But just to look at the science now, and looking back at the marshmallow experiment, which was this cute experiment. And if you haven't seen it before, do look it up on YouTube, because it is it's fascinating to see. What they did is they gave children, young toddlers, one marshmallow that they could have, and then they said they could have another marshmallow, and they would double it if they didn't eat the next marshmallow. So they could they have it in front of them, but they couldn't eat it, and they were left alone for a few minutes, and then when they came back, if they hadn't eaten it, they would get another marshmallow. So these are some of the pictures of the young man here trying to resist the temptation of eating the marshmallow, sniffing it, licking it, looking away from it, and the desperation on his face of trying to resist the temptation. And what they found in this study is that those young people who managed to inhibit their responses to want to eat the marshmallow and managed to hold out for the second marshmallow, they went on to be more successful in life when they grew up. And so that very early experiment, before we had the fMRI scanners, showed that inhibitory control is very closely linked to life outcomes in terms of success, in terms of career, earning potential, etc., happiness, and so on and so forth. It wasn't just all monetary based, but very, very interesting to see that longitudinal study shows that there is a link there. But also many other studies have shown there's a really close link between executive functions and academic attainment, and working memory and inhibition predict academic success better than IQ tests. So your executive functions at a young age can often predict your academic outcomes. And also we know that if you have executive function challenges, that often you have ADHD as well. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So I want to just try and ground this for you and help you to understand what this actually means, because getting tasks done, well, what does that mean? It impacts these kind of things. So meeting deadlines, prioritizing the work to be completed, regulating our emotions, inhibiting our responses, organizing our belonging, organizing thoughts on paper, holding information in our heads, that's our working memory, keeping time. And that one I'm really interested in as a geographer as well, because in the West, we have a certain relationship with time that differs in other cultures. So if you go to the Middle East or to Africa, punctuality is not a thing. It doesn't matter what time you turn up for a meeting, because it's very much, time management isn't seen as a desirable character trait per se. And so it's very interesting to see that the cultural nature of some of these expectations we have of young people, and also the ability to think flexibly, which we all had to do a lot of during COVID when plans were changing every 10 seconds, it seemed. So I'd like to know, and I'd like you to reflect yourself now, which of these challenges do you struggle with? Because we're going to do a little bit more self-reflection, dig a bit deeper in a second. Okay, working memory coming out as the biggest one here, holding information in our heads, fascinating. Then we've got regulating our emotions. Yes, part of being a human being is very difficult to regulate our emotions, and yet we expect young children to be able to do this, and we punish them if they're not able to do it. Prioritizing our work to be completed, inhibiting our responses, organizing our thoughts on paper across the board. All of us kind of grown-ups as adults really struggling with all of these things. And so my next question is, last time you struggled with these things, how did you feel? What emotions did you feel? And this should create a word cloud for us. So just think back. How did you feel? What emotions did you feel last time you struggled with those things? Last time you struggled to hold information in your head? Okay. First one coming in here, shame, frustration again, annoyed, helpless, stupid, cross, anxious, inadequate, low, sad, stressed, useless, losing my mind. Very common. And especially for those of us who are heading into perimenopause and menopause, our estrogen levels affect our executive functioning, specifically our working memory. And so often we can feel like we're losing our minds, but actually it's to do with our estrogen levels, our hormone levels that can affect that as well. Absolutely fascinating, but also deeply distressing, because we're not born feeling shame and frustration and disappointment and inadequacy and all of these negative emotions about struggling with our executive function skills. It comes from deep belief within society that if you struggle with these things, that you are not good enough. It is perpetuated throughout society in terms of schools and behavior policies, in terms of fines for forgetting the DART charge, for example, or your congestion charging if you live in London, for not having your tax return in on time, for missing a deadline for your coursework. All of these things that we're made to feel that we are not good enough when we struggle with these things. And this is a wrong that we at Connections of Mind are absolutely committed to putting right, because actually, if we can do the work that we're doing and educate people about this, then this word cloud can be more like curious, interested, fascinated, and just that kind of more growth mindset approach to it, where it's like, oh, something went wrong. How can I prevent that from happening in the future? And how can I learn from this experience, rather than how can I feel shame and disappointment and anxiety around my brain letting me down. So really, really fascinating how embedded this discrimination is in our society. So getting away from the really deep, meaningful stuff there, because I can get on my soapbox for quite a long time about that. I want to think about 3 core brain functions that are involved in executive functioning. So it's important to distinguish between the brain functions and the skills that are associated with those functions. So we've got cognitive flexibility. It's our ability to shift and change our thinking depending on different information that comes up. We've got inhibitory control, and that is our ability to stop ourselves from doing things that we might instinctually want to do. And then finally, we've got our working memory, that holding information in head whilst we're doing complex tasks. So those are the 3 brain functions. But then we also have all these associated skills. So you'll see we've got flexibility, we've got response inhibition, we've got working memory in there. We've also got things like emotional regulation. We've got organization, which is our controlling our things and being tidy.
We've got task initiation, which is the opposite of procrastination. We've got planning and prioritization. That's like decision making and planning things out. We've got time management. We've got goal-directed persistence, which is the same as grit or resilience. And importantly and fascinatingly, we've got metacognition, which is our ability to self-evaluate. And let's just dissect metacognition a bit and just show how that's linked to those three brain functions. So in order to be metacognitive, which means to self-evaluate, to self-assess, and to have that kind of helicopter view of ourselves and our impact in the world. So in order to be metacognitive, we need to have our really strong working memory that enables us to remember and take in all the inputs from around us and hold them in our head, whilst we think flexibly and try and think about how that impacted other people and the impact on other people. So if we struggle with our executive functioning, often we can really find it difficult to be metacognitive as well. So really interesting, and you can dissect all the other ones. We don't have, unfortunately, enough time to do that. But those brain functions are required for these particular skills. And you can see the definitions of those on your handout as well. We also know from the research that these 4 factors really impact our executive functions, and I'll come on to some more in a minute. So we've got stress, exercise, sleep, and nutrition. But also in recent years, and this has come about since I first learned about executive functions, the Harvard Center on Developing Child. So this isn't just some tin pot researcher somewhere coming up with something, but this is the world's probably leading institution and research center on child development, has found that excessive stress impacts the architecture of the brain, the development of the brain. And so if we are very stressed, or we have been in what we call toxic stress and experienced trauma. And so a lot of adopted children will have this, as well as children who've been in an environment where their executive function challenges have not been understood and they've been punished because of these challenges. Then they will have a different brain architecture, and there will be an enlarged amygdala, which is our fight, flight, or freeze part of our brain, that part of our brain that keeps us safe and our instinctual responses, and the prefrontal cortex, which is where the executive functions are found, will be smaller, and they can see that on brain scans now. They also know that excessive stress can impact our executive functioning for adults as well. So it's not just for children, but it doesn't affect the architecture so much at that stage, because the brain is more developed at that age. There is also a really strong link between executive functions and ADHD. This is Professor Russell Barkley here, who's like the godfather of ADHD, and he talks about ADHD basically being executive function deficit disorder. I don't like the word disorder. I prefer challenges or differences, but it's very interesting to see him using that as an interchangeable term. There's also a really strong link with dyslexia, and there's an understanding now that executive functions and executive function challenges could be a shared deficit, again, not sure about that word, underpinning variants of neurodevelopmental disorders. So it's becoming much more understood now about the role of executive functioning in various different neurodivergent traits. So moving on now to brain development, because that's what we're here to learn about, chores and brain development. I would like to poll the audience and ask, in which age range is the human brain considered to be fully mature? So if you'd like to take an educated guess for me. Okay. Ooh, fascinating stuff. I love it when we've got 2 options. Okay. So guys, drum roll. The correct answer is around 28, so between 26 and 30 for neurotypical brains, but because neurodivergent brains tend to be neurodevelopmentally kind of less mature, often they can mature into kind of the early 30s as well. So we're often expecting young people to do things that they're not cognitively able to do yet. And I'm going to talk more to that in a moment. So this is the way that they kind of tend to come online. Now, nobody develops in the same way. We know that from, just working with young people or looking after young people, that everyone develops in a different way, and that is totally fine. But in kind of on average, if we take an average look at brain development. What we're looking at is in the toddler years, we're getting those 3 core executive functions coming on board. So we've got working memory, cognitive flexibility, and response inhibition. But as we get older, so when we're in primary school, we're able to regulate our emotions more, sustain our attention, and think flexibly. But it's not until our high school years that we are able to avoid procrastination, to plan and prioritize our work, and to keep organized and keep things tidy. But really importantly, that it's been shown that time management, goal-directed persistence, and metacognition don't develop until we are post-university and into the world of work. Now, of course, you'll say, well, I know some young people who are very good at these things. Now, we're talking about the average, okay? And so what I believe is the UK education system set up, it's skewed to benefit those who have abnormally strong executive functions, and their development is stronger than others. So it's fascinating to see that often we're expecting things of young people that they can't cognitively do yet. But it's also really important to remember that we can all change our brains. And we were talking about neuroplasticity earlier, weren't we, Jill? And it's such a fascinating thing. So I'm going to share this video with you now. This video is available on your handout, and it's free. It's on YouTube, so that you'll be able to access it.
Not so long ago, many scientists believed that the brain was pretty much fixed after childhood. But recent advances now tell us they were mistaken. The brain can, and does, change throughout our lives. We can mould it, like plastic. Hence, neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity. But how does neuroplasticity work? Our brain is a bit like a computer circuit board. There are billions of pathways sending messages every time you feel, do, or think something. Some of these pathways are like superhighways. These are our habits, our embedded ways of being. Every time we think in a familiar way, complete a particular task, or feel a certain emotion, we widen the pathway, and it becomes easier for our brains to send these messages. Now, if we think about something from another perspective, try a new task, or choose a different emotion, we start treading a new pathway. And if we keep using that path, it gets wider and smoother, becoming a superhighway. And this new way of thinking, feeling, or doing becomes second nature. The old pathway is bypassed and deteriorates. This is neuroplasticity in action. No matter how old we are, we all have the ability to learn and change by rewiring our brains. It takes effort and regular repetition, but everyone can rewire their brains to create new.
Okay, so I'm just going to move us on from there. Hopefully it will move us on to the next slide. But really important video to just show and that we can all change our brains. And it's really important when we think of our brains like a muscle. The more we use it, the stronger it gets. And that's the neural pathways. And what happens is this fatty layer called myelin grows around neurons and insulates the electronic pathway, making it quicker and easier to do things. So our brains are malleable and we can learn new things at any age. But the effort that it takes to learn new things goes up the older we are, and that's because we've got to move away from the old pathway and move towards the new pathway, and our brain will always revert to the easiest path. So we have to use a lot of goal-directed persistence in order to overcome any challenges or learn new habits that we might want to. And what we know from the neuroscience and from psychology is that it takes around 60 iterations of a task for it to become second nature. So to form a habit, you need to do something 60 times. Now let's think about that in terms of something we do daily. So if we do something daily, that's 2 months that we need to do something for. If we do something weekly, we need to do it for over a year in order for it to become second nature. So it does take a lot of time and effort for us to form new habits. And it's really important to remember that it's not easy. A lot of people say, oh, you say that, everyone can change their brains, you kind of trivialize it. Not at all. It's very, very difficult. And that's why we need support to do it, but it can absolutely be done. But we also know that well-being is essential for optimal brain functioning too. And these factors, safety, exercise, connection, fun, joy, calm, and sleep all play a part. So by connection, we mean connecting with people who we love or that we feel a connection with. With fun, that's about play, and joy, it's about feelings of happiness, calm, with mindfulness, yoga, that kind of thing. Sleep and food are fairly self-explanatory. So I'd like you to think about your child now. How strong, or the person that you've come to this for, or maybe one of your students if you come for one of your students, but how strong are your child's building blocks, the child you've got in mind? And it's very interesting when we do this. It tends to be quite high at the beginning of term, and then towards the end of term, the building blocks seem to be falling off. But very, very interesting to see this. So safety coming out high, fun and joy coming out high too, but exercise quite low, calm very low, sleep and food quite low, connections even coming at just over halfway. So very interesting to see there that if we know all these factors impact strong executive functioning, we need to be looking after and prioritizing these building blocks over everything else, over homework, over violin practice, over everything, because these are so foundational to young people's brain development. But also executive function executive function skills can be developed in other ways, but we need to get the building blocks right first. So we cannot work on our executive functions and develop them unless we've got a really strong firm basis. Otherwise, the brain just simply cannot develop. But there is these two amazing books that we can access. These are the books that I read when I first had my light bulb moment. So do look those up. They're available on all good booksellers. But also, and it says this very clearly in that book, but also many other different publications, that chores, household chores, doing housework, have been repeatedly shown to help young people to develop executive function skills. So I would like to ask you now, which of these do you do for your child? So which of these do you do for your child? So it seems that across the board, that we're all doing some of these things for our children, which is understandable and quite common. So don't feel bad about it, but do start thinking about what you can do for them. Really interesting that washing and cooking, everybody, I think, said that they do that for them. Now, doing things like laundry and cooking have been proven specifically to help with executive function development. If you think about following a recipe, you've got to get all the ingredients out. So you've got to use your organization skills. You've got to use your working memory to remember the task that needs to be done. You've got to have your response inhibition, not to get distracted by something when you've got some milk boiling on the stove. You've got to use your time management to set timers in order so that whatever you're making doesn't burn. And so cooking is such an important way of doing it, but often we don't do that because we're worried about the risk of burning, of cutting, etc. But it is worth the risk to develop these skills with young people because they are so foundational to their brain development. So I'm not going to go into all of these different ones because that would be a whole different course, I think, but really important to think about and reflect on how you can get them to do all of these things, because all of these things will help with their executive function skill development. Interestingly, planning a trip isn't coming up very highly there, but I tell you, there's nothing more motivating for a young person than getting involved in planning trips to do fun things, working out how long it's going to take you on Google Maps to get there, what form of transport you're going to take, what you need to pack to go in the car, how you're going to remember everything that you need to do last minute, and so on and so forth. So really, really important to think about how we can get young people involved in all of these things. But also we must remember about Vygotsky's, who is, and I think I pronounced that right, I'm dyslexic, so sometimes I do get these things wrong. But he is a great theorist in education, and he has this idea of this zone of proximal development, which is the best zone of learning. So your comfort zone is what you can do now. Your zone of proximal development is things that you can do with help, and your anxiety zone is things that you can't do, and that make you push you out of your comfort zone. So we want to be looking at making sure we're not asking children to do chores that's going to set them up to failure. You're not going to suddenly turn around and say, right, I'm going to make some pancakes tomorrow without having shown them how to use the cooker safely. And showing them, you know, how to measure out the milk and the flour and the eggs, and you really supported that development. So we're not talking about throwing them in the deep end, but we're talking about helping them to do things with your support, just the same as you would learn anything else, like riding a bike or piano practice or anything along those lines. And also online, you can find so many different psychologists created age appropriate chores as well, so that you can start looking at things that they can do. So from the age of 2, you can be getting your children involved in the chores, and getting them involved. And I have a 3-year-old, and if I try and tell her what to wear, she gets on her high horse. She loves being in control. And children do, they love having that independence, and the younger we can get them started, the better. So do take a look at those kind of resources. But it's also really important to remember that motivation is key. So in order to get children to do these things, we need to keep them motivated. And it's all very individual. What motivates one person won't motivate someone else. And that's because of the structures of our brains, what we're interested in, and also the level of dopamine in our brain, and various other hormones as well. So for some young people, just helping them to understand that they have this amazing thing called their prefrontal cortex, where their executive functions are, and doing household chores will help them to develop that part of the brain, which will stand them in great stead for when they're older and they have responsibilities and can be independent. So for some young people, that will be enough to just tell them about that, and that will get them motivated. But others might need a bit more motivation. So for my 11-year-old, she used to do all these things on her own, and then she got really into horses, and that's very expensive, as some of you will know if you're into horses too. And so rather than just keep walking out for more and more horsey stuff, we've said to her that if she does certain household chores, that she gets some money, and so when she's saving up for something, she gets really motivated and she does it, but there's no pressure on her apart from that. It's totally up to her. So she does things like unpacking the dishwasher and laying the table for breakfast and cooking breakfast at the weekend, and bathing her sisters and getting them dressed and ready for bed, and reading them a story and putting them to bed, and that kind of thing. But it doesn't have to be money as well. So if you're not comfortable with that, it could be like little perks, like getting to choose the meal or the menu that you're having for a family meal, getting to sit in the front seat of the car, and little things like that, that can kind of reward and add motivation. It is key too. So it would depend on the child, and you as parents will know that best. And we have this 3-step approach at Connections in mind. So for us, it's about these 3 steps, and they come in order, and you can't do support without connection and collaboration first. I'm going to take you through what we mean by that. So connection is all about empathy, and empathy is different from sympathy. Empathy is about feeling with young people when they're struggling with these things, feeling their emotions about how hard it is when they're struggling to control their emotions, or to remember what their homework was, or to get out of bed and get to school and get dressed, and all of these things. Connecting with something that we know inside of ourselves, of that feeling, and being with them in the emotion when they're finding it difficult. So connect is about empathy, but it's also about a shared executive function literacy. So that's about talking about executive function skills at home, profiling. We've got some on your handout, you'll see we've got adult and child profilers, so that you can look at your profiles and you can compare notes and see where your strengths are aligned and where they're different. And really kind of talking about it and normalizing it. We do that a lot at home here. Mummy's working memories let her down again. And my eldest daughter, my 11-year-old, knows that she cannot rely on my working memory. So she'll even like put her horse riding gear in the back of the car before she goes to school because she knows we're going, and I will forget it. So it's things like that, just talking about these things. And it means that, you know, she's motivated because that's something she wants to do. And I feel that she has control over that. So I don't have the anxiety about, oh, what am I going to forget for her as well. So it worked really well. So connection is all about empathy, and executive function is just normalizing these things and making it not that we're bad people if we forget these things. The relationship my daughter and I have about the working memory is not, oh, you know, oh, mummy's stupid, or, you know, mummy's brain isn't working. It's just, well, we know that my working memory isn't that strong. And so we need strategies to overcome that. And that's just part of being in a loving family together. The next one is about collaboration. So autonomy is really, really key. We need to offer children opportunities to take risks and to do things by themselves. So my 3-year-old helps me to bring in, we have the milk and more, you know, the glass bottles, the milk, she helps me to bring those in, and she carries them across our tiled floor to the fridge. And you know, once every 3 weeks, we might get a broken bottle of milk, but she's learning the responsibility of doing it for herself, and that she feels so proud of herself, and you can see how much that impacts her. So taking measured risks, obviously we're not wanting to put anyone in danger, but taking measured risks and giving children autonomy, that sense of control and agency in their own lives, is absolutely fundamental to this. But also using questions as well, asking them, oh, what do we need to remember for school today? You know, oh, I'm so curious about what happened yesterday when we forgot blah, blah, blah. Because it's just that curiosity that we need to have to build new strategies. We don't need to be cross, upset, frustrated, etc. about it. And then we move on to support. Support is about shepherding and not engineering. So this comes from Professor Russell Barkley, who reminds us that as parents of neurodivergent children, that we maybe didn't get the child that we had in our mind's eye when we were pregnant with them, or when we dreamt of having a child. We got the child we got. And our job is not to engineer the child, but yet to provide a safe environment for them to build up their building blocks of their brain development, and to give them opportunities for development. So by offering them opportunities like I do with my daughter, and the, you know, paying her for the chores if she does them, but there's no pressure if she doesn't. And it's amazing now, she's taken that on to, she's 11, and she's completely in control of all her homework as well. She won't let me anywhere near it because she wants to be in control of that. So it kind of crosses over into other areas of her life because she knows she has that autonomy, and I've provided that safe environment for her. It's really important. I should mention that she is quite neurodivergent as well, and really struggles with her emotional regulation, but we are really working on lots of other things as well as the emotional regulation piece. And then finally, we've got scaffolding. So scaffolding is all about checklists, reminders, post-it notes, routines, etc. But it's really important to remember the other steps. So we can't just, as parents, just stay up all night putting together these amazing checklists and expect our children to follow them. We need to co-create them with our children. And so in my family, what we do is we use Canva. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's kind of an online design software, and they can choose the pictures or the images of their checklists, and they get to put it together themselves. And there's so much more brought into it. We do that for this morning routine for school, and what equipment they need to take in with them for their clubs or what activities or whatever they've got, and they absolutely love it, and it works every day, so it's brilliant. So just to draw your attention to a couple of resources before we finish with some questions. So we do have some links to these, and I'll pop them in during the Q&A. We do have a strategy bank available on our website, which is full of different strategies for all of the executive function skills. So you might want to access that. And then also we do, for younger children, we do have these cards with these characters. For example, for planning and prioritization, we've got Penny Planner, who is a squirrel who puts away her nuts for the winter, and then has them available for herself. And on the back of the card, you've got some I can statements, what I can do, and so strategies that young people can use. So it's a really great way of building stories around our executive function skills. So those are available too on our website. And because we love Bell House, we have put together a 20% off for those 2 resources, and that is available from this evening onwards. You just have to add them to your cart and then press apply coupon, as I've circled it here so you can see how to do it. You just press apply coupon and then put in the code BellHouse20, and you will be able to access the coupon. And finally, just to say, we are here to help. We are a community interest company, a non-profit, and we are just dedicated to supporting people and to righting the wrong of the discrimination that neurodivergent people face in society. We have a team of amazing coaches who work one-on-one with young people and adults, offering executive function coaching. We also do training and EPD for organisations and schools. And we have our amazing CIM learning site, which is full of lots of self-study courses and also some training courses that we offer. We offer an SEN professional training course and also a coach training course as well, both 5-week courses and a hybrid approach. We're also on something called Mighty Networks. You can look us up on there. We're on Facebook and on LinkedIn and Instagram as well. And finally, it's just to say that what I've been talking to you about today is really important for neurodivergent children, but it is really important. It's also good for everybody. So really just to remember that this is just good for general child development. So get them doing more chores, please.